I was like, I was using ink, and it was the first time I used ink, so it had to go so fast. It was drying, and then all of a sudden, the ball of ink fell and exploded and
I
splattered.
have to say, I was on the phone.
Yeah, Maryam witnessed a lot of them, and I don't know. There was this moment where it exploded, and I was like, okay, it has to stop. This painting's done, but I came back the next day, and I didn't even recognize it. And I think that's the most exciting part, if painting can reveal these other dimensions within us that we don't know or understand.
Welcome to Future Dialogues, a series of conversations between artists and creatives, organized and hosted by Kurimanzutto and supported by Casa Dragones. Today we present a dialogue between Maryam Hoseini and WangShui about artistic processes, painting, technology, and the concepts of friendship and love, topics they have been discussing over several months. This time, they met on the occasion of WangShui's first solo exhibition in the United States, which opened at Kurimanzutto, New York in November 2024. Our guest, Maryam Hoseini, creates liminal worlds through which she explores gender construction and the inherent violence in power dynamics. Hoseini's paintings become a gateway to a realm where fragmented architectural environments act as a stage for unfolding narratives in which the boundaries of subjectivity are probed. Through video, sculpture, painting, and installation, WangShui explores divergent structures of perception, examining the psychosomatic loops that form our experience of the world. A central theme in their work is liminality and its radical potential as a form of resistance. WangShui often addresses the latent space of images and materials as a way to activate the hallucinatory states between detail and distance, transparency and opacity, knowing and unknowing. Let's listen.
Hello, everyone.
Hi. Thank you all for coming.
Yes. Well, thank you all coming. Thank you. I'm happy to be here in conversation with Shui, my dear friend. And also, so thanks for the invitation, you and kurimanzutto. And thank you all for coming. It's especially important in these times to get together and collectively share space and talk about art, life, friendship, love. And so with that being said, we're going to talk about Shui's beautiful show that sort of one of the central narratives in the show is around five portraits of Shui's best friends. And, well, I'm honored to be portrayed. One of the first painting over there is a painting portrait of me. It's called Maryam's String Theory, that later on we'll get to talk about that. But now I just want to, I want us to kind of begin and talk about friendship and love as sort of this ongoing conversation that we have been had. It's almost like 1 year anniversary of us diving deeper into the concept of love and reading more and more about it and having conversations. I think it was important for us and also relevant to time and this time. And so that's like something that I think it was very essential to your thinking around this show. And maybe we can start from there.
I'm really honored to have Maryam here because they are a really close friend of mine, and they also really guided me through the process of the genesis of the painting and kind of how to think about painting, how to think about mark making. And so, because this was the first show that I did here I really wanted to kind of bring out all of these relationships that were so fundamental to the process of generating the work from its seed state. And yeah, I mean, the subject of love is something we talk a lot on the phone. And there's these subjects that come up that we kind of do these sort of deeper dives into just between us. It's not formal or anything. But I think when we were starting to see and feel a lot of kind of violence in the world, a question we kind of had was, how do we operate or participate or contribute in a way that involved the production of the work. So the work wasn't just made for like some small audience, meanwhile all of these really dark things were happening in the world, which is why we kind of did this deep dive into love, and I really wanted to think about it from a lot of different angles, thinking about it from, ways that I had to deconstruct a lot of what we thought love was. And to do that, I wanted to look at it from kind of this very intense 360-degree view that kind of moved everywhere between something like a movie and something like quantum physics, how to think about, the particular physics that could create such a collision or a bond or have a reverberation in the world. And there's so many things to say there, but I think what became really exciting to me was I realized that painting was the kind of perfect nexus for a lot of these things, for it to surge through your body and out your fingertips.
Yeah, I think the other thing, like, of course, like painting was one of the, definitely one of the paths to, we explored that. But also I think, I remember I actually like wrote it this morning. I went back to our text messages and there was one part that we were like back and forth going, that the sort of result of it was something like friendship resides in the ability to share the illusion of meaning, but when the illusion is shared, it's no longer an illusion. It becomes reality. And I think what you did here, was that by sharing, by putting the work out there, by making it, it's like about meaning making, that you did with painting and with, I don't know, like I think it just like then meaning is not this presence, but becomes an experience, and I think through friendship, through sharing, through love, tenderness, I think that was like something that, like painting was one of the ways to explore that and that meaning making.
Yeah, and I think something we debate a lot is kind of the question of everyone's always asking what the painting is about. And Maryam likes to say it's about making painting. Or the subject is painting, the act of painting, which I think is something that's so powerful, because if you start to infuse the process of painting with all of these different dimensions of emotion and love, then that is the act that you're generating and putting into the world energetically. And I think it was so hard for me to understand that, not being trained in painting and always seeing painting from the outside, and it's so easy to project all of these things onto it about what it is, but when you actually get to tap into the gold of making it, then you realize that's it. It connects so many things about kind of, to me, physics.
But do you want to, now that like, okay, we said it at the beginning, this is Shui's first like concentrated exhibition on painting, and painting the subject that we talk the most about. But do you want to talk a little bit about like how you began painting? Because as maybe a lot of you may know, Trey used to got the master in film and video, and used to make a lot of like video installation. I'm sure they will still make it, but at some point you started painting, which I think it was during the pandemic, no? And I think like the shift that happened, not through this practice that is now so important to you and you're so dedicated to it, and so it's just like, and then it became the point that we keep talking and debating about it. So like, do you want to talk about like how it started, and also then from there maybe like the choice of like materials and how this whole process began?
Yeah. I think from the beginning, my work was always about light. And I read this book in the early pandemic, this very like scientific book about photons and the refractive indexes of light. And it got me very interested in thinking about how to express light on a single surface, and how to modulate it, how to regulate it, how to redirect it. But it threw me into this kind of journey of looking for a material that had a certain range of refractive ability. And at first I was painting on vellum, and I always wanted to paint, I just never thought I thought I was going to have to wait a really long time to do it for some reason. I don't know. But the pandemic was this perfect moment where I was isolated, and I kind of was in this little house with this glass window, and I kept putting vellum on the window and painting on it, because to me it always had this strong relationship to the screen and the light emitted from the screen. And it's always kind of been this question about like how much light is, taps, and how much light is harnessed to kind of manipulate our desires now. And so that was the sort of starting point for me. And then I realized vellum was too flexible. And that's kind of when I arrived at the aluminum, which was understanding that it had this really intense backlight that was built into the material. And as you score it and scratch it, it begins to bring that out even more. And it was just such a simple way. Like often a lot of these works are made with sandpaper, and I'm just barely touching it, and all of a sudden it can produce an image. And then painting on top of it becomes another way to kind of push and pull that light. And so to me, the work is all the same. Like I don't differentiate between the video or the sculpture, but I think it's become more interesting for me to achieve certain things on a
maybe
single
your body
surface.
Relationship is different with it. Like something that I think
exactly.
it's very,
exactly.
It's a part that we also talk a lot about, your body relationship to it, but also like the way that the transformation that happened, and then as a result become something that we were talking about how the works are, like I was using the word like, when I look at the paintings here in the show, I think about them as they are staining a memory, they're like a recording a moment, a diary, like a haptic, experience. And so I know that you're dealing, light, as you said, that it was like so a big part of like all of your work, but also I think maybe the way that, you can talk about like, I don't know, I think the body relationship is something that is shifted. And then as a result, we as viewer find another connection to it too, and see various layers of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think to me, that's what I was missing when I was working digitally. Really, kind of the action and involvement of the body. And even when I was making video, for example, I always, in the process of the production, I always tried to be as physical as possible. But so much of the post-production was just sitting at a computer. Which is why I started making video sculptures, because it was so much about struggling with the material itself. And I think then painting kind of unlocked even more for me in understanding. I mean, I do all of these other types of research about body and sort of trauma, how much we store. And the more I began to think about it, the more I realized we have so much knowledge that's stored inside of our bodies. And it's, stored for generations across time. And so why wouldn't we access that truth when it's right in our fingertips? And I think painting has become this, in a way, the most efficient way for me to release that energy. And so even speaking to something about technology, it's almost the most productive way to me to speak to it from my body, how I'm experiencing it in my body as a feeling, as a sensation. It's also why I'm very interested in different ways of understanding the body. And it's something we talk about a lot is kind of trauma therapy. It's about tracing where trauma is stored in the body, how it can distort your body. How if something is sort of wrong and twisted, it can affect the whole area around it. I think if you want to understand, for me, trying to understand the impact of something like technology and all of this sort of virtual projection that we're all involved with, we have to kind of deconstruct it with our bodies.
Yeah, it's like, but also like another thing that it usually comes up is that like maybe technology is about wrongness, and kind of what you do with painting and to understand that, I don't know, the desire, and the desire and its connection to our consciousness. I think there is something like a deep. I mean, technology just came up now, but I mean, you've been working with like AI, but using AI as this other, lens, as painting become a lens, and all of them for you to understand the relationship between desire and consciousness, So I think, it's this back and forth that we have, is that how do we use these tools that we have, how do we use technology, how do we use nature, as a lens, and that was maybe you can.
Yeah, I mean, I think this, to me, working with technology is about understanding consciousness. And that, to me, is the most interesting thing about something like machine learning or AI. It's not about what it can produce, but it's about how it forms images, how it forms ideas, how it forms language. If we look at from the base foundational structure of it, almost like in a like that's how I like to look at AI, almost like in a molecular way, how it builds pixel by pixel. I'm really interested in the process and the programs and how they actually generate. I don't care at all what they can do in the end. But that to me is maybe one of the closest ways we can understand how consciousness operates. And actually, I don't even want to know fully, because actually so much of it is about mystery, which is so important to me, the mystery of any of this. And that's really important, but there's something that's so satisfying about mirroring these different modes of consciousness. And so it's the thing that connects everything to me. It connects and one of the things I've been talking about with AI, for example, is how it's all about pattern recognition. And pattern recognition in relation to painting is, related to style, form, gesture. But then it also applies to behavior. Like the ways that we behave, we're stuck in these certain loops of behavior. They could be formed by our experience. They could be formed by trauma. But then if you turn that lens also to nature, the way pattern operates again, they're all connected. And I've seen the same patterns, the same underlying mesh or matrix or whatever you want to call it within all of these different realms. And I think it's in our human nature to want to express those structures. And I think that's what led to the creation of something like AI. But to me, it's only useful if we can use that information to understand, to get us back to a place where we can actually see truth. To me, inside of that code is the truth of form, it's the truth of life, of love. And when you see it, you can feel it.
Yeah, to tap into, to access to that sort of you're dealing with this sort of ontology of forms, when you're talking about the base of it, the DNA of the pattern, the forms, and I think in a way, of course, that's something that maybe it's in our collective consciousness, and we can access to it, in various way if we try, And I think I just want to connect that to the paintings in a way that I think because you go deep in those parts and really challenge those forms, and then for us or for the viewer to look at the work, then you're dealing with forms and patterns and repetition, of actions and gestures and, processes that then each person connects to it on their way that their body connects to it. Does that make sense? And I think that is where, I keep going back to it, and that's what this show and generally in painting, I think does is that everyone walks into it, and because it's so much about touch, and it's about accessing how you were going to this painting, that it was through accessing via AI or nature and the recognition of pattern, that I think you, as a result, something is shared that everyone enters to it with their own body relationship, that is not just at the physical. It's this other dimension, if that's,
It's like if a dog sees a dog, they get excited. So if your body pattern sees another body pattern it relates to, it's activated,
Yeah.
And I think that is kind of the magic of viewing art. If there's something in there that kind of resonates with you.
Yeah. But also I think even to become specific about that, to create experience, I think we can I think that painting over there and even the one behind us is the title is Qualia, right? That one is okay, that one is a hard pronunciation for me. This one is, and maybe you and the meaning of it in Latin. Like maybe you can talk about that, you know, then it will, because it's related to experience, you know, and maybe that will open up more of that, you know, topic about experience and consciousness.
Yeah. So this one, that one, and I think the one in the room are have the word qualia in the title. And it's a word that's used in a lot of kind of philosophical debates about what makes us conscious beings. And the word is, they use examples of like, if you can see an apple and describe it as a yellow or red apple, that's what makes you kind of conscious. Some people think it's subjective and some people think it's representational. And I think that's a kind of funny mirror to this kind of dialogue in painting versus like with abstraction and and representation. But I think there's something at the core of it, to me, that's about being hyper present. To me, that is so much about consciousness, your ability to be here or to be touching a surface. And these three works were really kind of, I guess I'll say, the works that I am most fascinated by in the show are the works that I don't know where they came from. I have no idea what this is. But it's about having this portal or tapping into a shadow or a different space within our consciousness that you might not usually have access to. And to get there requires all of this sort of process and ritual. And that's what has become really fun for me about thinking about painting. Like, what I eat for breakfast, or, you know, but then you get to these moments like where this one, I was about to leave the studio and it was nothing. And then I was about to leave the studio and then I was like, actually, I'm going to stay for 5 minutes. And then this just happened. And then I was like, I was using ink and it was the first time I used ink. So it had to go so fast. It was drying. And then all of a sudden the ball of ink fell and exploded and splattered.
I have to say I was on the phone.
Yeah. Maryam witnessed a lot of them. And I don't know, there was this moment where it exploded and I was like, okay, it has to stop. This painting's done. But I came back the next day and I didn't even recognize it. And I think that's the most exciting part, if painting can reveal these other dimensions within us that we don't know or understand.
That's why I think, I think we're, on one hand, we're talking about, you know, pattern recognition and behavior. And the other hand, like, I mean, painting as like working through problem, you know. But there is something, I mean, we'll talk about that. But there is something about this painting, the immediacy of it, like the necessity that at that moment you needed to record a feeling, a moment, a desire, a memory, a touch that needed to be shared. And I think that is something that when I look at the work, I keep going back to it, you know, because there are some of the works that is about like working through a problem that is like also the psychological, you know, aspects that we all like sort of dealing with it, you know. When we go to our therapist, we're working through this problem, we're working through this behavior. But then I think painting is so much of that, you know, that we are. I mean, for myself, I call it a lot of therapy. I know. I mean, it's like a battle of like, you know, working through so many different layers, but I think in some of the works is like that, but in some of them it was like the importance or the immediacy of that, things that needed to be put out there, you know.
Well, I think one of the things, it's what you're saying is making me think about, it's recognizing a pattern, but then figuring out how to break the pattern. And that's what this whole show was for me. Every piece was me trying to do something new that I didn't understand. And I think that process only comes when you have a hyper awareness of what the pattern is, if you're able to identify it. So I kept using new tools, new inks, new materials that I had very little control of. And the ink was so exciting to me because I had no control over it. And I used new tools and tried to move my arms in ways that that hurt, or, like that piece there in the center, that piece was so hard for me to work on because those panels, when they were on the wall blank, it was so precious to me that I didn't want to touch it. I kept getting scared of it, and I was like, maybe it's done. Maybe it doesn't need anything. And I almost wanted to show it as blank. And then I had all of these test panels in my studio that I would just do sketches and kind of test different things on. And I showed a picture of one of them to Maryam at some point, and she was like, that's the masterpiece, that little thing. And I told her about this painting I was this surface I was struggling with, and they very clearly said, oh, you just need to treat that one like your test panel. And that's exactly what I did. The next day, I just trashed that whole panel. And then what emerged out of it was something so interesting, But I think anyone who paints knows this thing. When you start doing a behavior or a mark or a gesture that you know so well, it's you so quickly move into a default mode. And to me, it's so exciting when you basically realize the whole objective is actually to break it, because then you just have millions of tools around you. Like you can use trash, like the things that I've used on the surfaces in this were just like such random things I had in the studio, things I never opened before, and yeah, I think there's something so powerful about really breaking the pattern.
Yeah, breaking your own pattern. But also I think, of course, we're talking about it in this way that it's like as a result, it's all very intentional decisions. But at the moment, I kind of thinking about that is also makes me to bring up various kinds of kind of work and mark makings that's happening here. And to me, that's very related to our forever conversation about identity, about defying categorization, about not wanting to be one thing, but, and, as identity, we'll have multiple of that. And it's I think each of this work, when I say defying categorization, I don't we do that in any part of our, life, as we try. And so in a way, I think you making this work was so much related to that too, that you didn't want to give into one way of doing that you knew how to do it, but rather to make that challenge of, I don't want any of them to be the same, or, to do that, which I think to me that's related to this, more deeper part of, our practices.
Yeah, it's actually, that's a good one. I think, that is such a big part of our dialogue most of the time. Everyone knows that, in our field now, so much value is put on a fixed form of identity, and that ends up trapping you, and that becomes your work and your value. And I think for both of us, we've always held each other very accountable to constantly breaking and challenging what it means to be anything. And even the idea of queerness has become so specified and fixed, and we've always been very resistant to these sort of languages and words. And I think it's exactly the same project, to get dressed in the morning and, present something, and then the next day is an opportunity to completely break that thing you created yesterday as an identity or a gender or an ethnicity. There's so many aspects of that are so mutable, but it's not, the objective is not to break it for no reason. It's not reactive to me. It's actually, it should just always be intuitive. And I think that also comes back to painting. It's like, when you tap into pure intuition, that's when everything just flows. And the same could go for life and how you present yourself. The painting that I made, the portrait I made of Maryam, the first portrait in the show, it was about this day that Maryam decided to change their hairstyle and split their hair down the middle, which now I've
it's
taken
gone
off.
now. Moving
So I
into
took
the
it.
new chapter.
I'm trying it. But it was a really fascinating day because all of these things in their life fell into place. And we kept being so impressed by how such a tiny shift could realign the structure of their life. And it really did a lot. And so I titled that work Maryam's String Theory, and it's like about this idea that, a millimeter next to you is some different version, parallel version of you living this whole other life, and you can make a tiny little gesture and shift onto that track. And so in the painting, I mean, you can't see it, but there's like these train tracks intersecting. And yeah, I mean, I think that's maybe the point is that everything has to constantly be this active intention and change that we're embracing.
Well, if it's up to us, we have records of like 10 hours even talking, so we could keep going, but I see some signs that they tell us to open it up to you guys and if there are any questions. But yeah.
You're so professional.
All right, for the podcast. Shui, can you talk about the frames for your paintings, especially the ones that are more sculptural?
Yeah. Well, I started thinking about the frames through the small frames for the portraits. And there's so much to say about those, but my first interest was in the kind of modular form of them. They're in a style called crown of thorns, but the structural principle of the crown of thorns is tensegrity, which is like no glue is needed. It's just this kind of perfect balance with tension. And to me, there was something so important about that in relation to how I think about the modularity of data, but also about how I think about the modularity of friendship, the modularity of love, how there are these structures that can click into each other. And you kind of don't need all of this other sort of stuff, like glue. But then from there, I kind of became really interested in kind of trying a lot of different things, seeing what else could kind of bring the image out and pull it back. And I mean, the panels, I was originally working with them without frames, and they are architectural panels, and they go back to this kind of thing about modularity, but I wanted to also give them their own space and their own world, and that's kind of when I started thinking about kind of how can you slightly expand the structure and use that structure to connect to a different structure. Meaning, like, for example, like I started putting the crown of thorns frames next to each other and thinking about the relationship between them, but then also how they stood on their own.
Yeah, we didn't even get to talk about modularity because that's like a lot. That's how you actually basically think about like these units of information, units of like the pattern. And I think to me, the frames was like sort of challenging that, but also, I think like there was like this other addition that came to the work that I can see it now expand to other things. Yeah.
Hello. Thanks so much. I was wondering if you could talk about the maybe horizontality, because there's something about the work that kind of like moves both upwards, downwards, and I see the drips and everything, but because of the way that you talked about light and this idea that this kind of like the light is coming through and your relationship to screens, but in this case, we're not looking at screens. I guess like I'm also seeing this kind of like format as something that's slightly, like if you were standing as a shape person, it's almost your body size. It's kind of, I almost see them as carpets that have been kind of like sliding up, and I could also go back down. And in the process of making, I don't know, I guess like it also asking me questions around like how the use of light intervenes in the making of them as a tool as well. I mean, I'm curious about if you move light or if you move your body according to the lights, etc., etc. I'm just curious about, and for me somehow that talks about like challenging these kind of planar relationships that we have.
Yeah. Actually, Maryam came to my studio earlier today and was talking about how dramatic the lighting was in there. Like there was a painting that was getting blasted by sunlight. And I love working with inconsistent light in the studio, like having the works evolve and thinking you did one thing and then seeing it later and it's something else. To me, making marks under different environmental circumstances is also a way to sort of collage these different dimensions of time into the work. So that, I mean, when it shows up in the gallery and there's like real lighting for once, sometimes I can't even recognize it. But I think a work should have that versatility. And it's also, to me, related to this thing that I've talked about, how the work should look bad on cameras. It should look bad online because that the way we perceive is so complex that nothing should be flat in reality, you know? And so all that to say, I have terrible lighting in my studio. It's like always changing. I have these little spotlights that I move around. But there was a point when Maryam and I shared a studio upstate, and it was in a barn, and it was lined with these small windows, and every day we would watch the sunset, and you could see the sun setting on the works, and that was something that was so powerful and beautiful for us, and it really taught us a lot about color, about light.
And it affected each of our works in different ways. I remember I really entered to another era of color and a series of work that, I started actually like using more sort of like luminosity through like exploring that through paint and various kinds of material, you know, the piece that you have now. Translucency, and you know, and I think it was, I think it really, that was the time that I started using that, and I think it was for you also opened up whole other, I mean, you constantly challenge that as well, because that in turn enters this, like the collapse of different times and dimensions and spaces that come through with light. And it totally was, I mean, it was on different levels, like poetically, that was something that I was like calling our forms like poetic forms, and then of course, like on material level, it made me personally to explore various kinds of like paints. But yeah, for you is also, I think, I mean, like every time we come to the gallery here, looking at the work, it just reveals another thing. It depends on what's the condition that time of the day. And so I think this ongoingness of the piece, of the work, of the painting, like it's like also, I mean, we're entering now to a whole other conversation, because I think it's all about like not being fixed, because the painting become not only you and your act of doing, and or like, as painters, like, it becomes like this performance of doing, of like, or the body become the instrument, of acting and doing and, and making. And then the painting has this aliveness too, and ongoingness.
One of the things, I've been here a few times looking at the work, and one of the things that really struck me, and I heard it today, that's why I came to hear you, because I never heard you speak. And it was fascinating to hear you, because underneath all of this talk that you were talking about was this interest in science, the interest in string theory, the interest in quantum mechanics. All these things are very, very important to your work, but what's fascinating, it's not a positivist science. It's an activist science. It's a way that art has the possibilities, artists have the possibilities of investigating the same fields of science, but coming up with other programs, other paradigms. So one of the things that I'm really interested in right now, and I think that I feel that your paintings are expressing that, is this idea of astrobiology and the relationship of what's called the planetary. So the planetary is this idea that takes over from the global. The global has become a concept concerning economic fluidity. How do you transfer funds from one country to another? What is the global economy? But planetarity is how you open a totally enlightened philosophy, which is Eurocentric, patriarchal, and so forth and so on. How do you open it up to other cosmologies? How do you embrace other epistemologies to create a new kind of earthling? So I'm wondering, my question for you, besides that statement, is I'm feeling that this work is really about the birth of planets and the birth of a kind of astrobiology. And I was wondering if this is another field that you're interested in or not, or if that didn't come to mind.
I love astrobiology. I would do that if I could start over. But I think it relates back to what we were talking about with these patterns, right? Because I think my theory is that even in a different galaxy, you'll see the same DNA or structures that undergird everything. And I think the more we are able to kind of connect the dots between these different patterns and structures, the more we can unlock, about the mysteries or, other planetary life. And I do follow a lot of kind of astrobiologists that are kind of asking these questions. And I think it always comes back to the particle, the smallest. I mean, in quantum physics, the biggest question is, what is the smallest unit? And when you get down to that level, that's when you start seeing all of these patterns. But I think personally, what is really productive is this practice of pendulating between the microscopic and the really zoomed out view. There's something about this movement between scale where so much happens. And I think if we talk about not being fixed or changing or moving or taking action, it's about this constant zooming in and zooming out where we kind of discover so much of the truth.
Okay. Was that supposed to be the last? Great.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Future Dialogues.